The argument had started over something trivial, a misplaced bill, a late dinner. At least, that's what I thought until Carla's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "You're not man enough to keep me." I froze. My mind tried to process her words, but before I could respond, she reached into her bag and tossed a stack of papers onto the kitchen counter. "Divorce papers. You should have seen this coming," she said with a cold smile, her tone dripping with condescension. "This marriage has been dead for years." Her words hit harder than I cared to admit, but I refused to let her see the cracks forming in my composure. Instead, I leaned back against the counter, crossing my arms as I studied her. Carla's confidence was unnerving. She wasn't just walking away from our marriage. She was dismantling it with an air of calculated detachment. Her smirk told me she believed she'd already won. But what Carla didn't know was that I had seen this coming. For months, I'd noticed the subtle changes. Her late nights out, the sudden obsession with luxury brands, and the dismissive way she spoke to me. I had chosen to give her the benefit of the doubt, hoping it was a phase, but deep down, I had prepared for this moment. "I guess I'm supposed to sign these now?" I asked, gesturing to the divorce papers. "That would be a start," she replied, her tone sharp. I didn't respond. Instead, I picked up the papers and flipped through them casually, as though they were a contract at work. My silence seemed to unnerve her, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. What hurt the most wasn't her words, it was her actions. Carla had drained our shared savings account, maxed out the credit cards, and spent thousands on luxury vacations, designer clothes, and gifts for herself. She hadn't just decided to leave me. She'd been planning this for months, systematically ensuring that I'd be left with as little as possible. The worst part? She was unapologetic. "I deserve this," she said, her voice steady as she poured herself a glass of wine. "I've spent years sacrificing for you, and now it's my turn to live." I clenched my jaw, willing myself to stay calm. Carla didn't deserve my anger. Not yet. Letting her see my frustration would only fuel her arrogance, and I refused to give her that satisfaction. Instead, I played along, signing the papers with a flourish and handing them back to her. "There you go," I said, my voice even. "Now we can both move on." She seemed surprised by my lack of resistance, but she quickly recovered, her smirk returning. "I'll have my lawyer file these first thing tomorrow," she said, turning to leave. As she walked out the door, I stood there in the silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand answers. But another part, the quieter, more calculating part, knew that this wasn't over. Once the shock wore off, I sat down at the dining table, my mind racing. Carla thought she had outmaneuvered me, but she had underestimated me. While she had been plotting her escape, I had been quietly documenting her behavior. Every suspicious transaction, every extravagant purchase, it was all there, recorded and organized. What Carla didn't realize was that the credit card she had been recklessly using wasn't tied to our joint account. Years ago, I had added her as an authorized user on a card that was issued under her name. Every dollar she spent, every luxury item she bought, it was all her responsibility. The thought brought a small, bitter smile to my face. Carla had been so focused on her own game that she hadn't noticed the pieces I had been quietly moving into place. I spent the rest of the evening reviewing the evidence, meticulously compiling everything I would need for the legal battle ahead. Receipts, bank statements, and screenshots of her social media posts. All of it painted a clear picture of her betrayal and greed. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. Carla had chosen to destroy our marriage, but I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. As I closed the folder and set it aside, a sense of calm washed over me. Carla may have landed the first blow, but the fight was far from over. The next morning, as I sat at my desk sipping coffee, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was Carla, posting yet another photo on social media, this time of a new designer handbag, captioned with a smug, "Treat yourself." I shook my head, setting the phone down with a quiet laugh. She had no idea what was coming. For now, I would let her enjoy her illusion of victory. But deep down, I knew the truth. The final blow hadn't been hers, It was mine, and it was only a matter of time before she felt it. The day after Carla walked out, I found myself sitting at the dining table, sifting through years of financial records and shared expenses. What I discovered was both infuriating and validating. Each bank statement and receipt confirmed what I had already suspected. Carla's betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial. She had been systematically bleeding our accounts dry for months, possibly years, under the guise of self-care and work obligations. But here's where things got interesting. I noticed a pattern in her spending, transactions that didn't match her explanations. Luxury items she had claimed were for work events were bought during vacations she'd never mentioned. Airline tickets, high-end restaurants, and boutique hotels started popping up in cities where she had no work connections. Carla had turned my trust into her personal piggy bank, funding a lifestyle I had never consented to. And then there was the credit card, the one she thought was linked to our joint account. In reality, it was tied entirely to her name. Years ago, when we first got married, I had added her as an authorized user on a card issued under her Social Security number. She had assumed it was a shared account, but every swipe, every splurge, every reckless purchase, those were her debts, not mine. As I stared at the mountain of evidence, a bitter smile crept across my face. Carla had dug her own grave, and she didn't even know it. Later that evening, I decided to dig deeper. Her social media posts painted a damning picture. Carla flaunting designer clothes, posing with expensive cocktails, and tagging herself at exclusive resorts. The captions were dripping with self-indulgence. Asterisk, living my best life. Asterisk and asterisk, treat yourself. Asterisk. Her latest post showed her lounging poolside at some high-end hotel, a champagne flute in hand. The comments were filled with admiration and envy, friends cheering her on for her so-called empowerment. Little did they know, the same woman bragging about her newfound freedom was burning through money she didn't have. That wasn't all. Through her posts, I noticed recurring mentions of a name, Carl. The same Carl who had shown up at her company's holiday party last year, the one she introduced as her work friend. It all made sense now. Carl wasn't just a friend. He was the man she had left me for. The dots connected easily after that. There were photos of them together at the same resorts, tagged in the same cities, always careful not to pose too closely. It was subtle, but not subtle enough. They thought they had been clever, but they had underestimated how much I paid attention. I decided to call in some help. Alan, a private investigator I had worked with in the past, was someone I trusted to be thorough and discreet. When I explained the situation, he didn't seem surprised. People always think they're smarter than they are, he said with a chuckle. Give me a week, and I'll have everything you need. True to his word, Alan delivered. Within days, he had gathered indisputable proof of Carla's affair with Carl. Photos, timestamps, emails, and even a few damning text messages that he managed to pull from her phone backup. One exchange stood out. Carl, asterisk, when are you finally going to leave him? Asterisk, Carla, asterisk soon. I just need a little more time to get everything in place. Asterisk, Carl, asterisk, you sure he doesn't suspect anything? Asterisk, Carla, asterisk, please. Marcus is too blind to see what's happening. He's still playing the perfect husband. Asterisk. I stared at those words for a long time, feeling a mix of anger, humiliation, and, oddly enough, relief. Her lies, her manipulation, her betrayal. It was all laid bare now. There was no more room for doubt or denial. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that Carla's betrayal wasn't just about infidelity. It was about control. She had taken advantage of my trust and used it to secure her own exit plan, leaving me to clean up the mess she had created. But what she didn't realize was that I had been quietly preparing my own plan all along. I called my lawyer, Nathan, and laid everything out for him. We have more than enough, he said confidently. This will tip the scales entirely in your favor. Together, we began building a case. One that would ensure Carla walked away with nothing more than the consequences of her actions. Every piece of evidence, every transaction, every social media post became another weapon in my arsenal. Meanwhile, Carla remained oblivious. She continued to flaunt her lifestyle, likely believing she was untouchable. Her posts grew bolder, her captions more brazen. Asterisk, finally free. Asterisk and asterisk, out with the old, in with the new. Asterisk. I let her enjoy the illusion of victory, knowing it wouldn't last. The truth was a ticking time bomb, and when it detonated, it would dismantle the fantasy she had built for herself. One night, as I sat in my newly quiet home, reviewing the final pieces of our case, I felt a sense of clarity. Carla had betrayed me in the worst ways imaginable, but her actions had also freed me from a toxic relationship I hadn't realized was suffocating me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control, not just of the situation, but of my own life. By the time I closed the file and turned off the lights, I knew one thing for certain. Carla thought she had won, but she had no idea the game was just beginning. The days after Carla's smug departure were spent quietly, methodically setting the stage for what I knew had to come next. If her parting words and actions had taught me anything, it was that she believed herself untouchable. But her overconfidence would be her undoing. I wasn't going to lash out in anger or beg for explanations. No, this called for precision. I met with Nathan, my lawyer, and laid out everything I had collected so far. Financial records, screenshots of her social media escapades, and the private investigator's damning report. Nathan's reaction was exactly what I'd hoped for. "This is gold, Marcus," he said, flipping through the evidence with a satisfied smirk. "Not only does this confirm infidelity, but her reckless spending puts us in a strong position to argue she's been financially abusive." "Good," I said firmly. "I want her to walk away with nothing." Nathan nodded. "First, we'll file for divorce and lock down the accounts. She's already proven she's a liability. Let's make sure she can't touch anything more." The following day, I went to the bank to sever every financial tie Carla still had to me. I closed our joint accounts, transferred my personal savings to a separate account, and ensured her name was removed from anything she might still have access to. The credit card, the one she thought was a shared liability, remained active. I wanted her to keep using it, unaware that every dollar she spent was stacking up against her, not me. At Nathan's recommendation, I also froze the assets tied to the house. Carla might have walked out thinking she'd be entitled to a sizable portion of the property's value, but with the evidence we had, the court would likely side with me. I wasn't just protecting myself. I was ensuring she couldn't manipulate the system to her advantage. At the same time, I reached out to Alan, my private investigator, for one final task. "Keep an eye on her," I told him. "I need to know if she's spending more, meeting with Carl, or making moves I should know about." "Consider it done," Alan said confidently. "She won't see me coming." With my finances secure and Alan keeping tabs on her, I began to focus on the next phase of my plan, exposing the truth. Carla, meanwhile, continued to live in blissful ignorance. Her social media was a steady stream of self-congratulatory posts, full of extravagant dinners, spa days, and vacations. She posed with Carl in subtle but undeniable ways, his hand just out of frame, their matching cocktails a dead giveaway. It was clear they thought they'd won. That smugness only fueled my determination. But as the days turned into weeks, cracks began to show. Carla started posting cryptic captions. Asterisk, new beginnings aren't always easy. Asterisk and asterisk, change is hard, but worth it. Asterisk, she was losing her audience, her once adoring followers now more curious about the drama than supportive of her independence. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. Nathan called me one afternoon with an update. "The court has accepted the evidence, and the motion to freeze her access to shared accounts is approved," he said. "From here on out, anything she spends on that credit card is entirely her responsibility." Hearing those words felt like a small but significant victory. Carla thought she was outsmarting me, using the card to fund her lifestyle while waiting for the divorce settlement to hand her a golden parachute. Little did she know, that parachute was filled with lead. "Let her keep spending," I said. "The bigger the bill, the harder she'll fall." The final piece of the trap was a legal maneuver Nathan suggested, a subpoena for Carl. While Carla had been careful to avoid outright naming him in the paperwork, the evidence Alan had gathered made it clear he was a central figure in her affair. By subpoenaing Carl, We'd force him to testify about their relationship, putting both of them under scrutiny. When Nathan presented the subpoena to the court, the judge approved it without hesitation. Within days, Carl was served, and Carla's world began to tilt. That night, I sat in my living room, reviewing the final preparations for the divorce proceedings. Every detail was accounted for. The financial evidence, the affair, the reckless spending. Carla had been so focused on her escape that she hadn't noticed the walls closing in around her. Alan called with an update. She and Carl were at a restaurant tonight. They were arguing. Something about money. She's starting to panic. Good, I said simply. Let her feel the pressure. As I went to bed that night, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in months. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. Carla had taken my trust, my love, and my resources for granted, and now she was facing the consequences of her actions. The trap was set, and the pieces were falling into place. Carla thought she had won, but she had underestimated the man she thought she had outsmarted. The next move was hers, but no matter what she did, the outcome was inevitable. The first meeting for the divorce proceedings was nothing short of a spectacle. Carla arrived early, her confidence practically radiating as she stepped into the conference room. She was dressed to impress in a tailored blazer and heels, the picture of a woman who thought she was untouchable. Her lawyer, a young and overly ambitious man who seemed eager to prove himself, followed closely behind her. I, on the other hand, kept things simple. A clean suit, a neutral expression, and Nathan, my calm and collected lawyer, by my side. It wasn't a performance for me. I didn't need one. I had come prepared with facts, evidence, and the truth. As soon as we sat down, Carla's lawyer launched into a laundry list of demands. Alimony, half of our savings, the house, and even my car, which I had owned before we got married. He painted her as the aggrieved party, a woman who had supported me tirelessly through the years while I neglected her needs. I glanced at Carla, who smirked as though she had already won. That smirk was the only confirmation I needed that she had no idea what was coming. Nathan waited patiently for the lawyer to finish his tirade before leaning forward, his calm demeanor unshaken. "Let's address these claims systematically, shall we?" he said, sliding a neatly organized folder across the table. Inside was everything. Records of Carla's excessive spending, screenshots of her social media posts flaunting her new lifestyle, and detailed evidence of her affair with Carl. Nathan walked them through it all, piece by piece, his tone professional yet cutting. Carla's confidence began to waver as each piece of evidence was presented. Her lawyer tried to object, but Nathan countered smoothly, reminding the room that the evidence was admissible and relevant to the division of assets. The turning point came when Nathan pulled out the financial records. He highlighted Carla's extravagant spending, thousands of dollars on designer handbags, spa treatments, and vacations, all while draining our shared accounts. "And let's not forget," Nathan said, flipping to another page, "the credit card balance. This card is tied solely to Mrs. Carter's name, meaning the $65,000 balance is entirely her responsibility." Carla's lawyer looked visibly stunned. "That's not possible," he stammered, glancing at Carla, who was now pale and silent. "It's all here," Nathan replied smoothly. "The card was issued under her Social Security number. Mr. Carter added her as an authorized user years ago, but the liability remains hers. She's been funding her lifestyle on borrowed money, and now she has to answer for it." The room fell silent as Carla processed what this meant. For months, she had been using that card to bankroll her new life, believing she could pin the debt on me. Now, she realized the truth. It was her burden to bear. Her smirk was gone, replaced by a mixture of shock and panic. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Her lawyer, clearly flustered, asked for a recess. As they stepped out of the room, I leaned back in my chair, letting out a quiet breath of satisfaction. "That went well," Nathan said, smiling slightly. "Better than I expected," I admitted. "She's not as confident now, is she?" When Carla and her lawyer returned, their demeanor had completely changed. Gone was the bravado, replaced by a defensive posture as they tried to salvage what they could. Carla's lawyer attempted to negotiate, suggesting a reduced alimony request and a division of assets that would still leave her with a sizable portion of the house's value. Nathan, however, wasn't budging. "We're not here to negotiate baseless demands," he said firmly. "Mr. Carter has provided ample evidence of Mrs. Carter's infidelity and financial misconduct. The court will take these actions into account, and I'm confident they'll rule in my client's favor." Carla's face twisted with frustration. "You think you're so clever," she snapped, glaring at me. "But this isn't over." "No, Carla," I said, my voice calm but firm. "For you, it's just beginning." As we left the meeting, I felt an odd sense of relief. The first battle had been fought, and I had come out on top. Carla's overconfidence had been her downfall, and now she was beginning to understand the consequences of her actions. Nathan patted me on the back as we walked to the parking lot. "You handled that well," he said. "Most people would have lost their cool, but you kept your composure." "Let her unravel," I replied. "The truth is already working against her. I don't need to do anything more." Over the next few weeks, the fallout from that meeting began to take shape. Carla's lawyer tried to file motions to suppress some of the evidence, but the court denied them. The financial documents were irrefutable, and the proof of her affair only solidified my case. Carla, meanwhile, started to crack under the pressure. Her once frequent social media posts slowed to a trickle, and mutual friends began to distance themselves as the truth about her behavior spread. I focused on staying calm and prepared, knowing that the next phase of the proceedings would be even more critical. Carla still thought she could salvage something from this, but the weight of her lies was beginning to crush her. The stage was set for the next chapter of this battle, and I was ready for whatever came next. A month into the divorce proceedings, Carla's world began to unravel faster than I anticipated. The confidence she had worn like armor during the first meeting was now nowhere to be found. Her calls to me had gone from smug and accusatory to frantic and desperate, though I rarely answered. I didn't need to. Her growing panic was evident everywhere else. It started with the letters. Notices from creditors began piling up on the doorstep of her temporary rental, which I only knew about thanks to Alan, my investigator. Carla had been spending freely on the credit card she assumed was my responsibility, and now the statements were coming back to haunt her. She finally snapped during one of her frantic calls. I answered this time, more out of curiosity than anything else. "You did this to me," she screamed the moment I picked up. "Did what, Carla?" I asked calmly, leaning back in my chair. "Let you max out a credit card that's in your name? I don't remember making you do that." "You knew what you were doing," she yelled, her voice cracking. "You set me up." "No, Carla," I replied, my tone even. "You set yourself up. You tore apart our marriage and thought you could take everything with you. All I did was ensure you couldn't ruin me in the process." Her silence was deafening. For the first time, I heard the weight of realization sink in on her end of the line. From that point on, the facade she had worked so hard to maintain began to crumble. The lavish dinners and shopping sprees disappeared from her social media feeds, replaced by vague posts about rebuilding and lessons learned. Mutual friends began reaching out, some cautiously asking for my side of the story, others outright apologizing for believing Carla's narrative. "She always made it seem like you were the bad guy," one friend admitted over coffee. "But now, well, people are starting to see the truth." I didn't say much in response. I didn't need to. The truth had a way of revealing itself, and Carla was doing most of the work for me. Every desperate post, every complaint about her unfair situation only painted her in a worse light. One evening, Alan called with an update. "You're not going to believe this," he said, barely hiding his amusement. Carla tried to return some of the designer bags she bought to make ends meet, but the store refused because they were past the return window. "Let me guess," I said, smirking. "She caused a scene." "Oh, absolutely. Security had to escort her out." Words getting around. The image of Carla, once so composed and smug, being dragged out of a high-end store was both satisfying and sobering. She was learning the hard way that actions have consequences, and no amount of entitlement could shield her from reality. At the next court hearing, the shift in Carla's demeanor was palpable. She no longer walked into the room with the same arrogance. Her once pristine appearance was slightly disheveled, and the confident smirk she had worn like a badge was replaced with nervous glances toward her lawyer. Nathan, ever the professional, laid out our case with precision. He presented further evidence of her financial irresponsibility and detailed how her actions had not only hurt me but also jeopardized her own stability. When it was Carla's turn to speak, she faltered. Her lawyer attempted to shift the blame, claiming I had manipulated the situation to my advantage. But the judge wasn't buying it. "Mrs. Carter," the judge said sternly, flipping through the evidence, "these records clearly show a pattern of reckless spending and dishonesty. Mr. Carter has acted within his rights to protect himself financially. You, on the other hand, have shown a blatant disregard for your responsibilities." Carla's face turned red, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. After the hearing, Carla cornered me in the hallway. "You've made your point," she said quietly, her tone a mix of anger and desperation. "What do you want from me?" "I don't want anything from you," I replied, meeting her gaze. "That's the difference between us, Carla. I'm not trying to destroy you. I'm just making sure you can't destroy me." She looked like she wanted to argue, but no words came out. Instead, she turned and walked away, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Over the next few weeks, her financial troubles only deepened. With her assets frozen and the mounting credit card debt now solely her responsibility, Carla was forced to make drastic changes. She sold her car, moved out of her rental, and took a job far below the lifestyle she had once flaunted. The friends who had cheered her on in the beginning were nowhere to be found now. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my own life. The house, once filled with tension and resentment, became a place of peace. I decluttered, redecorated, and made it my own again. Every small change felt like a step toward reclaiming not just my home but my sense of self. One day, I received a letter in the mail from Carla. It was short, almost pitiful in its tone. "Marcus, asterisk, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm sorry. I never thought it would end like this. I was selfish, and I let my greed blind me to what I had. You didn't deserve what I did to you. Asterisk. I hope you can find happiness again. Asterisk. I read the letter once before folding it neatly and placing it in a drawer. Her apology, while appreciated, didn't change anything. I had already made peace with the past. The only thing that mattered now was the future. The cracks in Carla's carefully curated image began to show faster than I anticipated. Her once vibrant social media presence, filled with photos of designer bags, lavish dinners, and poolside vacations, turned eerily quiet. The glamorous life she had flaunted for so long was unraveling, and people were starting to notice. It started with subtle changes. Her captions, once filled with overconfidence and condescension, now leaned into vague statements about life lessons and starting over. A mutual friend even sent me a screenshot of one particularly cryptic post. Asterisk, sometimes the path we choose isn't the right one, but every misstep teaches us something. Asterisk. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. Carla had built her image on lies and extravagance, convincing herself and everyone else that she was thriving after our separation. But now that the bills were piling up and the consequences of her choices were catching up to her, the cracks in her facade were impossible to hide. It wasn't long before the whispers began. Friends and acquaintances started reaching out, cautiously asking if I knew what was happening. "She's selling her handbags," one person mentioned. "I saw her listing them online for half the price she paid." Another said, "Did you hear she moved out of her rental?" Apparently, she couldn't keep up with the payments. I kept my responses short and neutral, refusing to feed the rumor mill. "I'm not sure," I'd say. "We don't talk much these days." It wasn't my job to spread her business. Her actions were doing that for her. One evening, I scrolled through her profile out of sheer curiosity. The pictures that had once been filled with laughter, luxury, and admiration from her followers were now sporadic and somber. Gone were the shots of her clinking glasses with Carl at high-end restaurants. Instead, there were blurry pictures of sunsets and captions about finding strength in solitude. Even more telling were the comments, or lack thereof. The friends who had once showered her with praise were nowhere to be found. Instead, The occasional comment came from strangers offering unsolicited advice or pointing out the obvious. Asterisk, maybe it's time to focus on what really matters instead of the material things. Asterisk, Carla, of course, never responded. Alan, my private investigator, called me one afternoon with an update. You won't believe this, he said, a chuckle evident in his voice. She's been trying to pawn off her jewelry. Let me guess, I replied. It's not going well. Not at all. The shops aren't offering her anywhere near what she wants, and she's getting desperate. I even overheard her on the phone with someone, trying to borrow money. I shook my head. She's in over her head. Alan paused before adding, Carl hasn't been around much either. It looks like he's starting to distance himself from her. I couldn't say I was surprised. Men like Carl were opportunists, drawn to the illusion of wealth and power. Now that Carla's resources were drying up, it was only a matter of time before he bailed. The confirmation came a few days later when a mutual acquaintance casually mentioned seeing Carl out with another woman. They were at that new rooftop bar downtown, she said, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. And let's just say he didn't look like a man in a committed relationship. I filed the information away, knowing it was only a matter of time before Carla realized she had been left in the dust. The final blow to her facade came in the form of a social media meltdown. One evening, Carla posted a long, rambling caption under a picture of an empty wine glass. It read like a mix of an apology and a plea for sympathy. Asterisk, life isn't always what it seems. Sometimes, the people we trust the most let us down. But I'm learning to stand on my own 2 feet again. Thank you to those who have stood by me through this difficult time. Asterisk. The comments section, however, was less forgiving. People weren't buying her act anymore. Someone bluntly asked, Asterisk, didn't you leave your husband for that guy, Carl? What happened to him? Asterisk another wrote, Asterisk, maybe if you stopped lying and using people, life wouldn't be so hard. Asterisk. Carla eventually deleted the post, but not before screenshots made their way around our circle. By the next morning, everyone knew the truth. Carla's perfect life was anything but. For me, the collapse of her social media persona was oddly satisfying. It wasn't about revenge, it was about validation. For months, Carla had tried to paint herself as the victim, someone who had risen above a toxic marriage to find happiness. But now, the world could see her for who she really was. A woman who had burned every bridge in her quest for more, only to find herself stranded and alone. Nathan called later that week with good news. The court is moving forward with the settlement, he said. Given the evidence we've provided, it's highly unlikely Carla will get anything more than what's already been outlined. And the debt? I asked. It's hers, Marcus. The judge isn't budging on that. She's responsible for every penny. I thanked him and hung up, feeling a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Carla had spent so long trying to destroy me, but in the end, she had only destroyed herself. As I sat on my back porch that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt an unfamiliar but welcome sense of peace. Carla's downfall wasn't something I had orchestrated. It was the natural result of her own choices. All I had done was refuse to let her drag me down with her. The storm she had unleashed was finally settling, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The day Carla had been dreading finally arrived, her bankruptcy hearing. It was a stark contrast to the confident woman who had once waltzed into restaurants, draped in designer fashion and dripping with smug superiority. Now, she looked drained, wearing an ill-fitted outfit that was clearly not part of her former wardrobe. The weight of her choices hung heavy in her posture, and for the first time, she seemed to grasp just how far she had fallen. I hadn't originally planned to attend. Nathan assured me there was no need, that the evidence had already spoken for itself. But curiosity, and a lingering need for closure, pulled me to the courthouse that morning. Sitting quietly in the back row, I watched as Carla took the stand, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly. The judge wasted no time. He started by reviewing her financial records, listing every extravagant purchase and unpaid debt. The tone of his voice was sharp, cutting through the courtroom like a knife. Mrs. Carter, he said, flipping through pages of documents. These records paint a clear picture of financial irresponsibility. Can you explain why you felt it was appropriate to accrue such massive debts on a card solely in your name? Carla's response was as weak as I expected. I didn't know, she stammered. I thought the card was linked to our joint account. The judge raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. Ignorance is not a defense, Mrs. Carter. The fact remains that you willingly spent beyond your means and failed to take responsibility for your actions. Nathan, seated beside me, leaned over and whispered, "She's digging her own grave." I nodded but said nothing, keeping my attention fixed on Carla. Her lawyer attempted to deflect, claiming that her spending was a result of emotional distress caused by our failing marriage. It was a laughable argument, and the judge wasn't having it. "Mr. Carter," the judge addressed me suddenly, motioning for me to stand. "As the primary victim of Mrs. Carter's financial recklessness, do you have anything to add?" I stood, feeling the weight of the room's attention shift toward me. Keeping my voice calm and measured, I said, "Your Honor, I trusted Carla with access to our finances because I believed in our partnership. Her actions not only violated that trust, but also jeopardized my financial stability. I've taken steps to protect myself, but I believe the evidence speaks for itself. Her debts are her responsibility, not mine." The judge nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. Please be seated." The hearing continued, each question from the judge peeling back another layer of Carla's lies and delusions. When he brought up her affair with Carl, her lawyer objected, claiming it was irrelevant. But the judge disagreed. "Mrs. Carter's choices extend beyond financial recklessness," he said. "Her behavior demonstrates a pattern of deceit and irresponsibility, both personal and financial. This information is entirely relevant to understanding her character." Carla's face turned crimson as the details of her affair were laid bare in a courtroom filled with strangers. The evidence of her trips with Carl, funded by her spiraling debt, was irrefutable. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her gaze fixed on the floor. When the judge delivered his verdict, it was swift and decisive. Carla was declared fully responsible for the credit card debt and ordered to pay restitution for several other mismanaged accounts. Her bankruptcy filing would wipe out some of her obligations, but the consequences of her actions were far from over. "Mrs. Carter," the judge concluded, "you have shown a blatant disregard for financial responsibility and the trust placed in you by your former spouse. I hope this serves as a wake-up call for you to reevaluate your priorities moving forward." Carla's shoulders slumped as the gavel came down. The room emptied quickly, but I remained seated, watching as she gathered her things. Her once proud posture was now replaced by defeat. For the first time, I felt a pang of something resembling pity, but it was fleeting. Outside the courthouse, she approached me hesitantly. "Marcus," she began, her voice shaking. I'm sorry. For everything." I studied her for a moment, searching for sincerity. "I appreciate the apology, Carla," I said finally, "but it doesn't change what happened. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't stick around to watch them fall. I turned and walked away, feeling lighter with every step. The day of reckoning had come and gone, and I had emerged on the other side intact. Nathan caught up with me as I reached the parking lot. "You handled that well," he said. "Not everyone could sit through something like that and keep their composure." "I've had enough chaos for one lifetime," I replied. "It's time to move on." That evening, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat on the porch, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. Carla's downfall wasn't something I had orchestrated. It was the inevitable result of her own decisions. All I had done was refuse to let her drag me down with her. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the horizon, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The storm was over, and the road ahead was mine to choose. Carla's life, once a curated display of excess and ambition, had crumbled into a sad collection of borrowed time and burned bridges. The bankruptcy hearing marked a turning point, not just for her financial situation, but for her place in the world. Her extravagant lifestyle was gone, and the walls were closing in fast. Her first hurdle was finding a place to live. Without financial support or access to credit, She was forced to move back in with her parents, a humiliating reversal for someone who had once prided herself on independence. I heard through mutual acquaintances that her relationship with them was tense. They were retired, living on a fixed income, and weren't thrilled about having their adult daughter move back into the small house she'd left years ago with big dreams and bigger promises. Alan, my investigator, confirmed that Carla was also struggling to find work. Her reputation, once bolstered by charm and connections, had taken a severe hit after her affair and reckless spending became public knowledge. Employers weren't eager to take on someone who had left such a messy trail in her personal life. The glamorous image she had tried so hard to project had turned into a liability. Socially, Carla was more isolated than ever. Her friends, many of whom had been enablers during her most destructive years, began to distance themselves as her circumstances worsened. The invitations to parties, brunches, and vacations dried up. She was no longer the life of the party, but a cautionary tale whispered about behind closed doors. Her relationship with Carl, unsurprisingly, didn't survive the fallout. According to Alan, Carl had moved on to another woman, a younger, wealthier one, leaving Carla to clean up the mess they had created together. Mutual friends confirmed that Carl hadn't even offered her so much as a parting apology. It was clear that he had used her, just as she had tried to use me. One afternoon, Carla called me. It was the first time I had answered her since the bankruptcy hearing. Her voice was a mixture of desperation and defeat. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I know I don't have any right to ask, but I need help." I leaned back in my chair, letting her words hang in the air. "What kind of help, Carla?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Financial help," she admitted. "Just until I get back on my feet." I sighed, not out of sympathy but out of exhaustion. "Carla, you made your choices. You spent recklessly, you betrayed my trust, and now you're facing the consequences. I'm not responsible for fixing the mess you created." "But Marcus," she pleaded, "I've changed. I've learned my lesson. I just need—" "No," I interrupted, my tone firm but calm. "You don't get to use me as your safety net. Not anymore." She started to cry, but I didn't stay on the line to listen. I hung up, blocking her number immediately after. It wasn't out of malice. It was about boundaries. Carla had spent years exploiting my kindness, and I wasn't going to let her do it again. The following weeks brought more stories of Carla's decline. She had started selling off the last of her belongings, including sentimental items like jewelry and keepsakes, just to make ends meet. Friends reported seeing her at discount stores, a far cry from the luxury boutiques she used to frequent. Despite everything, Carla tried to cling to her old identity. She posted sporadic updates on social media, framing her struggles as a journey of growth. But the carefully worded captions couldn't hide the reality. People weren't fooled. The comments were sparse, and the likes even sparser. Meanwhile, I was thriving. My days were filled with purpose, work, hobbies, time with friends and family. I had turned my house into a home again, redecorating and making it a space that reflected my new beginning. The quiet solitude that once felt lonely now felt peaceful. One evening, I received a message from Susan, Carl's ex-wife. It was unexpected but welcome. "I just wanted to thank you," she wrote, "for exposing the truth. It wasn't easy, but I've moved on, and I'm in a much better place now. I hope you are too." Her words were a reminder that healing was possible, even after betrayal. We exchanged a few more messages, sharing updates on our lives. She had remarried, and it was clear she had found happiness again. It gave me hope for my own future. As for Carla, I stopped keeping tabs on her after a while. There was no need. Her story was no longer my concern. The person she had become was unrecognizable from the woman I had once loved, and I had no interest in revisiting the past. One day, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Carla, handwritten on plain stationery. The tone was different from her previous attempts at communication. It wasn't defensive or manipulative, it was resigned. "Marcus, asterisk. I know I've said this before, but I need you to hear it again. I'm sorry. I didn't just hurt you. I destroyed everything we built together, and for what? Nothing. I thought I was chasing happiness, but I only found emptiness. Asterisk. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I hope you find peace knowing that I've finally accepted the blame. I wish you nothing but the best. Asterisk. I read the letter once before placing it in a drawer. Her words didn't stir anger or pity, just closure. It was the final piece of a chapter one had already closed. As I watched the sunset that evening, a sense of calm washed over me. Carla's life was a cautionary tale, but mine was a story of resilience. I had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and loss, but I had come out stronger on the other side. The consequences Carla faced were her own, and I had no interest in watching her downfall any further. My focus was on the life I was rebuilding, a life filled with hope, purpose, and peace. Rebuilding my life after the whirlwind of betrayal and the chaos Carla had left in her wake felt like navigating uncharted waters. The pieces of my old life were scattered, but for the first time in years, I had the clarity and determination to rebuild something stronger. I wasn't just moving on, I was crafting a new version of myself, one defined by resilience, not by the mistakes or manipulations of others. My first step was reclaiming the house. It had been a battleground, a place where Carla's lies and betrayal lingered in every room. But now it was mine. The first thing I did was declutter, physically and emotionally. I boxed up everything that reminded me of her. Old photos, trinkets from vacations, even her half-finished projects that had gathered dust in the corner of the living room. I donated most of it, keeping only what I thought might one day be meaningful for our kids to have. The act of purging was liberating. Each item I removed felt like a weight lifted, a piece of the past that no longer had power over me. With every bare wall and empty shelf, I saw potential, a blank canvas to design a life that reflected who I truly was. Next, I dove into projects I had put off for years. I repainted the walls, swapping the neutral tones Carla had preferred for vibrant colors that brought warmth and energy into the house. I replaced furniture, built shelves, and even landscaped the backyard. Every nail I hammered and every stroke of paint felt like reclaiming territory, turning the house from a reminder of the past into a symbol of my future. Friends and family noticed the change almost immediately. "The place feels different," my sister said during her first visit after the renovations. "It feels like you." Her words stayed with me. For so long, I had let Carla dictate how things were done, what the house looked like, how we spent our time, even how I saw myself. Now, for the first time, I was making choices solely for me, and it felt incredible. Emotionally, the process of rebuilding was harder. Therapy became a crucial part of my journey. I started seeing a counselor weekly, unpacking the pain and anger I had buried for so long. Talking about Carla's betrayal wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The more I confronted the hurt, the less control it had over me. Through therapy, I began to see patterns in my past relationships, not just with Carla but with others. I realized how often I had prioritized keeping the peace over standing up for myself, how I had allowed myself to shrink to fit someone else's narrative. Recognizing this was painful, but it was also empowering. I vowed never to lose myself in a relationship again. Professionally, I threw myself into work. My career had always been a source of pride, but now it became a lifeline. I took on new challenges, volunteered for projects, and even mentored younger colleagues. The distraction was helpful, but more importantly, it reminded me of my value. I wasn't just a man recovering from betrayal. I was capable, talented, and respected. Outside of work, I reconnected with hobbies I had long abandoned. I dusted off my guitar, started hiking again, and even signed up for a cooking class. Each activity felt like a small act of defiance against the version of myself I had been with Carla, a man who had forgotten what it meant to live fully. Then there was Claire. I met her at the cooking class, a quiet, kind woman with a quick wit and a passion for food. At first, our interactions were purely casual, exchanging tips on how not to burn a soufflé and laughing at our mutual lack of finesse in the kitchen. But over time, something shifted. There was a warmth to her that I hadn't realized I missed, a genuineness that stood in stark contrast to the facade Carla had worn for years. I was cautious. After everything I had been through, the idea of opening my heart to someone new was terrifying. But Claire never pushed. She was patient, letting our connection grow naturally. We started spending time together outside of class, grabbing coffee, going for walks, sharing stories about our lives. With her, there was no pressure, no pretense. It felt easy. As months turned into a year, I found myself in a place I never thought I'd reach: peace. Carla's presence in my life had faded to a distant memory, overshadowed by the joy and fulfillment I was rediscovering. My home was no longer a battleground but a sanctuary. My relationships were stronger, my career thriving, and my sense of self firmly intact. One evening, Claire and I sat on the back porch, watching the sunset. The yard, once overgrown and neglected, was now lush and vibrant, a reflection of the journey I had taken. As we sipped our wine, she turned to me and said, "You seem happy." "I am," I replied, surprised by how true the words felt. "I finally am." Carla, on the other hand, continued to struggle. Mutual friends occasionally updated me on her situation, though I never asked. She was still living with her parents, bouncing between jobs, and trying to repair a reputation that had been irreparably damaged. She had reached out a few more times, but I never responded. There was nothing left to say. Rebuilding my life wasn't about revenge or proving a point to Carla. It was about reclaiming what I had lost. Not just material things, but my confidence, my joy, and my identity. Betrayal had nearly broken me, but it had also forced me to grow in ways I never imagined. As I stood in the kitchen later that night, cooking dinner with Claire and laughing about a recipe gone wrong, I realized just how far I had come. The man I was now was stronger, wiser, and more whole than the man I had been before Carla's betrayal. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive. 5 years had passed since the day Carla handed me those divorce papers and shattered the illusion of the life we had built together. At the time, it felt like the world had collapsed under me, but now, standing on the other side of it all, I realized that her betrayal was the catalyst for my transformation. It had forced me to rediscover myself, rebuild my life, and prioritize the things that truly mattered. Life now was unrecognizable from the chaos Carla had left behind. Claire and I had built a home together. Not just a house, but a life filled with love, laughter, and trust. Our days were spent pursuing shared hobbies, exploring the world, and creating memories that felt genuine and untainted. She had brought a light into my life that I hadn't realized I needed, and I was grateful every single day for the second chance at happiness. Our family had grown too. The sound of tiny feet running across the hardwood floors and bursts of childish laughter filled the air, replacing the tense silences and heated arguments that had once defined my home. Parenthood brought its own challenges, but they were the kind of challenges I welcomed with open arms. Every scraped knee and sleepless night was a reminder of how far I had come and how much I had gained. Carla, on the other hand, was a shadow of her former self. Every now and then, I'd hear bits and pieces about her through mutual acquaintances. She had struggled to rebuild after the bankruptcy and divorce. Her attempts at rekindling friendships and regaining her professional reputation had largely failed. The choices she made had left her isolated, and the life of luxury she had once flaunted was now nothing more than a memory. One day, I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a letter from Carla. The handwriting was familiar, but shakier than I remembered. "Marcus, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I needed to write this. I've spent the last few years reflecting on everything that happened, and I realize now just how much damage I caused. Not just to you, but to myself. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't blame you for cutting me off. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, I thought I was chasing happiness, but all I did was destroy the one thing that truly mattered. You deserved better, and I failed you. I hope you found peace and happiness. You deserve that too." Reading her words, I felt no anger, no bitterness, just a profound sense of closure. Carla's apology didn't change the past, but it was a reminder that even the people who hurt us the most are capable of regret. I tucked the letter away in a drawer, unsure if I'd ever look at it again, but grateful for the finality it brought. Claire and I sat on the porch that evening, watching the sunset. The kids were inside, their laughter echoing through the open windows as they played. I handed her a glass of wine and raised mine in a quiet toast. To second chances, I said. She smiled, clinking her glass against mine. To second chances? The golden light of the setting sun bathed the yard, a yard I had once transformed as part of my healing process. It was lush now, full of life and growth, a perfect metaphor for everything we had built together. I thought back to the man I had been 5 years ago. He was broken, angry, and unsure of what the future held. But he was also determined. That determination had carried me through the darkest times and brought me to where I was now. I didn't just survive Carla's betrayal, I thrived because of it. The lessons I had learned were invaluable. The importance of boundaries, the strength of self-worth, and the power of resilience. Most importantly, I learned that no matter how devastating life's setbacks might be, they don't define us. What defines us is how we rise from them. As the evening turned to night, I tucked the kids into bed, their tiny hands clutching stuffed animals as they drifted off to sleep. Back downstairs, Claire was waiting for me, her warmth and love filling the room like a steady flame. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her close, and whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" she asked, looking up at me. "For reminding me that life can be beautiful again," I said. "For being my second chance." Carla's shadow no longer lingered in my mind. She was a part of my story, yes, but only a chapter, one that had ended long ago. The rest of the book was mine to write, and I had chosen to fill it with love, joy, and meaning. Standing on the porch once more, watching the stars twinkle above, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Life wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was mine, and it was good. For the first time in years, I was free.